Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa with ITS Communications, and today we are going to be talking about Microsoft Power Automate with Josh Gorel, who's with our O365 team. We also have Rafael Supa on. He is a co-host, but he's not going to be presenting today. But if you have any questions during today's session, you might see his name in the chat, answering questions here or there. So just wanted you to know who he was. He manages many of our O365 apps as well as several infrastructure services. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that I am recording today's session. So if you miss anything and want to go back and review it or share it with some colleagues who may not have been able to attend today's session, you'll get a follow-up email from me with a link to the recording as well as some helpful guides to help you get started with Power Automate. We also have everybody's mics muted just to prevent any unintended background noise during the presentation. However, any questions, please direct them to the chat, or if you'd like to come onto the microphone to ask your question, just go to the React button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar and do the raise hand button. And then I'll take you off the mic when there is a good opportunity for you to ask your question. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Josh. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thanks, Vanessa, and hopefully you guys aren't tired of hearing me. I know I did last week, so it's a back-to-back one. I apologize, you have to listen to my voice again, but hopefully this will be valuable for everyone. Today we're going to talk about Microsoft Power Automate. It is a very, very powerful tool, and a somewhat dangerous one I'll lead with. So I'm glad you guys are attending this to kind of learn more about it. And I always say this, but I cannot stress this enough for this service. I'm going to, start right off the bat, and it's going to be the theme of this presentation. If you have any questions or you're concerned about what anything is going to be doing with Power Automate, please reach out to me or my team. It's better safe than sorry, especially with this type of platform, because you can get into some dangerous areas, which we'll talk about, and we'll try to have you avoid. So please ask any questions that you have and reach out after the fact if you would like help to build your first one. So the agenda here with my cool little AI stressed out guy, the time that we, are find ourselves in lately, we have more and more work and less time, right? So Power Automate is a way to kind of assist with that, right? Any mundane, repetitive tasks that you have on a day-to-day basis, Power Automate may be a good solution to help streamline those tasks that you have and free up some of your time to focus on other things. Again, we're going to talk about the cautions and where this can go wrong and how to avoid that. We'll go over a UI overview. We'll do a getting started, kind of where to go, how to begin. We'll do a demo, and then we'll end with closing remarks and Q&A. All right, so I always like to start with why do I care, right? So why do I care about Power Automate? Why should I keep listening to this presentation? And the answer is it'll save time and money. So here at WCM and definitely in my previous institutions, I have saved a bunch of money by helping people build Power Automate flows that take time away from um, people that are handling these mundane sort of repetitive tasks and automating it, right? So all of these tasks that are very repetitive, you do the same thing over and over, especially in the fields of like notifications and updates, reminders, things like that. All of that is super easy to automate. And if you're not spending your time doing that, you can spend your time doing other things, and obviously that saves time and money. It reduces manual work to that same end, right? And because of reducing that manual work, the word manual, it will improve consistency and accuracy, right? So typos, copy paste mistakes, things like that doesn't happen when you automate something correctly, right? And then cross-system workflows, great use case for Power Automate. If you have something coming from one system that you want to use in a different system, Power Automate may be the solution for that. And then also, and this is another huge one, it empowers non-developers to build solutions, right? So I know we have a bunch of people on the call. Some of you may have IT backgrounds, development backgrounds. Some of you may not, and that's totally fine. Both is applicable for this presentation. There is no code going to be discussed in this presentation. And if there is, it'll be very tiny, like Excel workflow type things, right? So nothing super complicated. And now my confused guy is happy. So hopefully that's what you look like too. So this is what Microsoft calls the Power Platform, and there are other services that are being added into the Power Platform, but these are the main kind of flagship three. And what those are is Power Apps, Power BI, and Power Automate. And then I put little dot 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 because there is a couple more pieces of it, but these are kind of the flagship three that most people refer to as the Power Platform. So if you hear Power Platform, it is the overarching kind of grouping of Power Apps, Power BI, and Power Automate. Now, to talk about each one of those really quickly, Power Apps is app development for everyone. I'm sure we'll have a session on this at some point. If you have any questions about that one specifically, let me know, but not the focus of today. Power BI, data analytics and reporting. Some of you may be already familiar with this one. We have a whole team that kind of supports Power BI here at WCM, so I will also skip that one. Today, we're here to talk about Power Automate, which is automation for work. And Power Automate, what is it? Again, it is Microsoft's automation platform. Think of it like if you have the application If This Then That, or I think they call it If now, or shortcuts on your iPhone. When 11 o'clock hits, dim the lights for bedtime, right? Every morning when my alarm goes off, tell me the weather, things like that, right? It's that automation, but for work. And it takes repetitive tasks and automates them, and that key part there across different services, right? So you don't necessarily have to just stay within the Microsoft stack here, and we'll talk more about that. Out of the box, there are hundreds of services, but there's also ways to expand that with, API calls and things like that. And then also no code, low code interface with powerful capabilities, as they call it. And I think that's very true, right? Most of the time, you're not going to be dragging and dropping, selecting from drop downs and options that are within, and you won't have to touch any sort of code to build these automations. Okay. Couple of key concepts. And again, put any questions you have in the chat. I am going a little bit quick with these slides because we have a lot to cover today, just to be able to get to the demo. But any questions you have as we go along, feel free to use the chat. A couple of key concepts that you'll be hearing me say as we go through this, so you're aware, right? So Power Automate is the service, Microsoft Power Automate. An object, a better term, trying not to say the word twice, in Power Automate is a flow, right? So the automation you're building is called a flow. You may see documentation on the internet that uses the word Microsoft Flow. That used to be the name of the service, and then they renamed it to Power Automate, and the flow is what you're building, right? So just keep that in mind. The whole thing that we're building is called a flow. Every flow will start with a trigger, and that is what starts the flow, right? So it can be time-based, it can be something happens, or it can be when I say go, that's what's going to start the flow, so the trigger, right? And then after the trigger, you have one or many actions, right? And it could be send an email, could be send a Teams message, could be check this record in this location and see if this matches this, and if so, send this notification, right? And we'll talk more about that as we get into the demo as well. And then finally, connectors are the services your flow acts on or with, right? So that is Microsoft Outlook, for instance. That's a connector that's used to send email notifications, right? Or Microsoft Teams. Maybe you're waiting for something to change in a list or a form, which is what we're going to work on today. That is all examples of connectors. This is the most important slide. So if you take anything away from this presentation, it's this slide. Please be careful. Power Automate is a very powerful tool, but to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. There is areas, as you can see here on the screen, that things can go sideways, right? You can put your flow in an infinite loop. You can flood your inbox, right? You can message incorrect people. You can send incorrect information to somebody because your flow isn't set up properly, right? All of that's possible, and why you need to kind of be careful with when you're setting up your flow to make sure everything's bulletproof. And we're going to talk about ways to avoid all of these scary things. So don't let this hinder you. It is definitely a risk, and you should be aware of it. But by the end of this presentation, and with my assistance and my team's assistance, if you need any help, you can avoid all of these things. But please be careful. I want to stress that if you have any questions, please reach out. Don't just, try not to bug us and then have one of these things happen, right? Okay, Licensing, not too much to talk about here. Everybody is licensed for Power Automate here at WCM, so you should be able to get started today if you wish. There are premium connectors, and it's denoted by a little diamond in the platform. We'll see some of that in the demo here today. If you need a premium connector, we do have opportunities for that. You can reach out to me and we can have a conversation about it. But by and large, the standard connectors, all of the Microsoft stack, things like that, is out of the box with no additional costs. We do have a limit for the number of runs that a flow can have across our entire tenant. That limit is very, very high, luckily. However, that's why, again, building things in a smart way will help limit the number of flow runs that we have, right? So a run is whenever something is triggered. So keep that in mind. That's very important, right? So if you build a flow that says this is one that I see all the time that is a little bit dangerous, right? If I get an email from my boss, send me a Teams message, right? Because I don't check my email a bunch. I check Teams a lot. If I get an email from my boss, I want to know about it, send me a Teams message. And you might think, well, my boss doesn't email me all that much, so it's not going to be a bunch of flow runs, right? Well, that's not the case because the run has to check to see if it is your boss, right? So the trigger is actually you get an email and if you get a bunch of email, you can see how that will eat up a ton of flow runs, right? So keep that in mind as you're building. We do have a finite number of those, and if it starts to get absorbent, we'll, have reporting on that and have to have a conversation about what's going on there and if it's truly mission critical. We have a bunch of them, so as long as you build it correctly, you shouldn't run into that risk. But keep that in mind. Every time it even has to check to see if that's true, it will cost us a run. Couple of best practices. Start small and test often. I can't stress that one enough. When you're sending notifications, send it to yourself first, right? Before you send it to everybody. That way you can check the formatting of your email, make sure all your links work, make sure that the logic that you're building is bulletproof, right? And then the worst case is you get an email that doesn't make sense, but you know you're doing it, right? Trigger conditions and filters will be your friend, right? So maybe you don't want to uh, run this action all the time. Maybe you only want to run if a certain form is filled out a certain way, or if a certain list is set up in a certain way. Those will help you limit those flow runs. Error handling is very important, and we'll touch on that in the demo, right? So you can have a whole parallel branch, as it's called, that if something fails in the flow because too many characters, a user picks something that wasn't expected, whatever the case may be, you can send an email to yourself and say, hey, something's wrong here, we need to fix. Limit permissions, that's best practice for pretty much anything. And same for the next one, document and version your flows. That's best practice for pretty much everything as well. Okay, so now we'll start into how to create a flow. So again, in the demo, we'll touch on more of this, but this is the screen that you'll be presented with. Couple of caveats here. Obviously, you'll note here that choose your flows trigger is the only required field. Please name your flow. If I had administrative control to force a name, I would, but I can't. It's not required from Microsoft. And I think that's a big disservice. I run into that myself where I forget to name something. I build something, it works great, and then I forget about it for weeks, and then I want to add something to it, something changes, whatever the case may be. It will name it automatically for you, but it is very generic, and you'll never remember which one's which. So as you grow with Flow, this is going to be a big problem. So name your flows appropriately. The service that you're touching, what it's going to be doing. Think about, a best practice for naming conventions, but please at least give it a name so you'll know, what the flow is doing. And then the trigger, it's a required field because the flow has to start, right? So one of these triggers is what is going to initiate the flow. And there's just some examples at the top of really popular ones. And we're going to talk about the Forms one and the SharePoint one, the first two, today. So I'll leave that for the demo. This is what an example flow looks like, right? So the top card that you'll see here, in this case, manually trigger a flow, is the trigger. Again, you kind of have three options there. You have manually, that's here, literally when I click go, run this flow. That one's great for if you have like in this case, a bunch of planner tasks that you want to create when a project starts, right? So the project isn't yearly. It's not like taxes, for instance, because tax time is predictable. Maybe it's a project that whenever it comes up, you want to create all of these same cards in Planner, right? Rather than doing that manually, you can have a flow that, populates that for you. And when you click go, it'll create a new planner board, populate all of these cards, assign them appropriately, and get the project started with minimal effort. That's just one example for manually triggering a flow. You also have time-based, right? So that tax example is a good one for that, right? So if you want a planner board for every tax season, first of the year, you could automatically create a new planner board for the tax, previous year, populate all the cards again, assign them appropriately based on time rather than just when you click go. And then finally, the one that I think is most popular, and we'll be looking at today, is an automated cloud flow, which means when something happens, we're going to do something else, right? And that something can be defined in that previous screen that I showed, right? So it could be when a response is submitted, when an item is created, when a file is created, when a task is assigned, things like that. Any questions so far? I've been talking a lot.
Not yet.
Okay. Feel free to throw any in if you have them. I know this is kind of a new service, so the questions might be limited, which is why I kind of packed this presentation. So we'll keep going. So for this next screen here, this is the settings that you get per card. So each one of these items here, except for the first one, is an action, right? So the first one is your trigger. Every subsequent one is an action. Every action and trigger, for that matter, has settings within it, right? So you can see this list tasks as an example. You have to give it what group and what plan, right? Note that it's asking for the ID, but you don't have to necessarily know the ID or find the ID, right? It's going to search your account based on your connection and find all of the group and plans that you have access to in a dropdown, right? If it's not there, you can obviously default to the ID, right? But at the very bottom there, you'll see it's connected to my account. I can change the connection if I want to. By default, it's obviously your own. And then you can pick, what group, aka team in this case, and what plan you're associating with. And that card settings page will be different for each trigger or action that you have. This is a screenshot, and again, we'll talk about this in the demo more, of the settings that you have with the flow. I just wanted to highlight a couple of these. One, when you click on a flow at the top, you'll see a bunch of options. Couple to talk about here is obviously the edit button. We'll see that in the demo, but this is how you'll actually edit the flow itself to get into the flow card view. The sharing is one I want to super highlight. Flows are objects that are associated with you, right? So if you create a flow and you build something that is pretty mission critical, best practice, can't stress this enough, also, is to share that flow with somebody else, right? If you have a bunch of them, you can have a conversation about sharing them with a service account. If you have just your own, you might want to share it with a colleague, manager, whatever it might be. But please share your flows, because if you should win the lottery and leave the institution, that flow will live and die with your account, right? So please share your flow. And share early, right? Because you'll forget. I do this all the time, right? I'll create a flow, excuse me, I'll create a flow and I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll go back later and add somebody. And if the flow is just working, you never think of it. That's the beauty of flow, right? If it just works, then it works and you don't think about it. So as you're building it, share early, share it with a colleague, share it with your manager, share it with somebody so it has longevity if you should leave us. The Save As button is just to copy a flow, right? So you could take this flow and copy it and use the same logic, but different, resources if you want. Turn off is another one I want to talk about, right? So you can turn off a flow if you're building something and it's not quite ready. When you save it, it will be live, right? So you can use this button to turn it off. And that way you can keep testing with it, keep playing with it, but not have to worry about the trigger occurring. In the middle here, you have some basic information about the flow. And then at the bottom, and we'll see this today, you'll see a run history. So you'll be able to see if it's successful, failed for whatever reason, when it's running. Gives you a lot of good information here to see if it's working as you expect. I get this question a lot, so I made a whole slide about it, right? Help, I lost my flows. Um, this is something that I think is a little silly within the Microsoft stack. Again, I just support the application. I didn't build it. Um, there is two sections really that you'll be able to find your flows. So when you create a flow, it puts it in Cloud Flows by default, right? Especially if you do it in the cloud, which is what we'll be demoing today. Once you share it with somebody, which I just mentioned is best practice, right? It will be moved over here to share it with me. Even though it says shared with me and you were the one that shared it, I know that terminology is a little bit weird. Anything that you share will be moved over to this section. So just keep that in mind. Once you share it, Cloudflows will be empty. Don't panic. It's over here. Go over to here and you'll find it. Also, this is a good opportunity to mention, and I'll talk about this in the demo too. Unlike a lot of Microsoft technologies, as of right now, time of recording, flows do not autosave. So save often. I've been bitten by that a lot. So make sure that after you complete each card, you hit save. If you don't, you run the risk of losing stuff. Also, keep in mind everything that's required. And let me just back up to here real quick. Notice that these have red stars by it. You have to have everything filled in before you can save. Otherwise, it won't let you save. So it's best to complete a step and then hit the save button, and then complete another step, hit the save button, etc. I'll pause there for a minute and check uh, the chat here. Looks like Raf got that one for me. It is saved in the cloud. Yeah, so on the shared location, definitely share it with other people. There is a concept of sharing a flow with a list, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the demo, but it's best to share it with a person. So if that person needs to be a service account, you can have that conversation. For basic flows, at least just share it with a colleague or your manager, and reach out if you want a larger conversation about that. Um, Doug, you brought out a great point there. There is a timeout of these flows, so it'll turn off your flow if it doesn't have activity. I think you're right. 90 days of inactivity is the cutoff. Um, you can turn them back on, obviously, in that one click in the settings screen. I don't know of any way around that. I can look into that a little bit more and get back to you. But what he's talking about here is if it doesn't have any activity for, I think you're right, 90 days, it'll be turned off. It's really easy to turn back on, and you will be notified about that. So keep that in mind. When you get that notification, you could just go in and turn it back on. There'll be a link right in the notification to turn it back on. But you're right, that is a important call out that if it's no activity, it'll be turned off. Um, yes. So, Tom, your question was a good one. I'll summarize it. Any advice for designing durable workflows when, like you just mentioned, Planner, Microsoft perpetually renames, drops, and resurrects products? That is kind of the bane of my existence living in the Microsoft world. But luckily, they are very communicative when it comes to that. Renames doesn't tend to matter, right? So Planner gets renamed frequently. It auto reconnects or reconfigures the connection for you. So Microsoft knows that it's Planner, right? If they rename it to Plan, they will just update that connection. So you don't have to worry about that. Um, renaming solves that problem. However, for removing products, I think that's a little more rare. But if that's the case, we will have a larger conversation about that because the decommission will have other pieces in that, and obviously a piece of that will be the flow as well, and discussing how to move that to a different location. So we'll handle that on a one-off basis. All right, so I think that's all the questions for now. Where do I get started? Again, I'm going to start bottom up. I should have put that at the top. Ask for help. Don't think you're bugging me. Shoot me an email, shoot me a Teams message. If you want to, one-on-one conversation about it with you and your team, more than happy to do that. I even here at WCM have saved multiple six figures, if not seven, of people's time just by building these with people. That's not my success, it's their success because they know the process, right? Please use me as a resource. Don't try to do this in a vacuum and get stuck or get something in a loop and do something that you don't intend. Use me as a resource. There is a lot of community and learning resources as well that I think Vanessa is going to attach in the email along with these slides. So utilize that to kind of get familiar with the basics, but please use me as a resource too. There are templates. Again, be careful with the templates because it Microsoft wants you to use a bunch of runs, right? So make sure you put in your own spice to that template to make sure that you're limiting it to only run when you truly want it to run. And then I totally did this upside down, but where you get started is make.powerautomate.com, or you can get to it in the portal, which I'll show you here in a second. Final thoughts: automate intentionally, not recklessly. Please remember that, right? So make sure you're testing frequently. Make sure you monitor it for failures or over successes. That's equally bad, right? Talk to me or talk to IT if your flow touches critical systems, especially, but also if you just want to have a conversation about that. Okay, and then we'll move into the demo. So let's do that, and then we'll open it up for any more questions. So for Power Automate, you can go to just portal.office.com. It'll log you in, right? And you hit the little waffle menu and find Power Automate. If you don't see Power Automate here, you might not have used it yet, obviously. So click More Apps, and you'll find it in this list below, which is right here, right? I did some of this already, so just in the sake of making sure we had enough time. But just to get started, this is what Power Automate looks like. This is where the landing page that you'll see. It's this home page. These are actually really good, these learning entry level stuff here. Go ahead and, take these courses. I think they're really good. A lot of them are somewhat quick, some of them are longer. But browse them if you like. Where I always start is my flows, right? So this is my test account, but in my not test account, I have a bunch of these, right? So I want to make sure that I'm not forgetting something I already built. So make sure that, there isn't already a example in here that you've already done. And again, keep in mind, shared with me, you want to check both locations, right? When you go to create a new flow, click the new flow button. The ones that you'll use most of the time for sake of time here are these middle three. So automated cloud flow, again, it's the one that I described where something happens, then do something else, right? And that something is configurable. Instant cloud flow is when I click run this flow whenever I say, right? And then finally, scheduled cloud flow. This is at a certain reoccurrence, run this flow. There's use cases for all, but this one I think is the most frequent, followed by scheduled, and then instance probably the least common. And we're going to be talking about automated Cloudflow today. Eugene, I saw your question in there. Does ITS recommend naming convention for flows? There's nothing specific, right? But as you grow with Flow, your own department might want to create some sort of naming convention. So I'll leave that up to you and your department because no two people will be the same with Flow. The only thing I can say is please definitely 100% name it something, right? Because if you don't, it'll be named like when new response is submitted, an arrow. Add a item to this list, but it won't say what list and it won't say what form, and it's super confusing. So at least put like, X form to Y list. Something as simple as that will be helpful to get started. When you're doing an automated Cloudflow, you just give it a name and then give it a trigger. You can search through these triggers. There's a bunch of them. We're going to pick basically these two today. And then if you pick a scheduled Cloudflow, give it a name, and then give it a starting date and time and a reoccurrence, right? So you want it to be every week, every month, every day, whatever the case may be. And then finally, the instant Cloudflow is the simplest one, right? It's just when I manually trigger the flow, that first option here. All right, so we are going to talk about forms and lists, which is probably the two biggest questions I get when I've built flows for people here at WCM. So what I did just to save some time, we already had a form demonstration in the past, so I pre-built this form for us so we didn't have to worry about creating it here on the call because we are going to run short on time. This Power Automate demo is just what I named it, and I asked 6 relatively simple questions, right? First name, last name, seaweed, question category, a short description, and a comments or longer description field, right? So this is the form that I built that we are going to use for the first automation we're going to build together here. Rather, I did build it, but we're going to go over each one, right? So in here, let's go back. This is my forms example. The reason I like to do the forms example first is this is a pretty common question I get. It's like, yes, we have, ticketing systems and this and that, but there are some use cases where you just want to gather information, doesn't necessarily constitute a ticket per se. This one's kind of a bad example because this probably should be done in a ticketing system, but it's the life I live, so I just built this way. But keep in mind that no two people will use Power Automate the same. So think as we go through this how you can extrapolate this example to other examples you might have. This is what the flow looks like as far as settings goes. You see a failure here that I was testing with and some successes. So this is the 28-day run history I was talking about in the presentation. You'll be able to see when it ran, how long it took to run, and then if it was successful or failed. And if you click on any one of these, it'll give you more information, right? So this one was just a date formatting issue that we'll talk about in a second. But just to show you what it looks like, it gives you kind of more information about what happened, right? So it'll give you the error. You can click on each card, get more information. Don't let all of this scare you. It basically tells you what the problem was, and it was a date mismatch. But then equally important, you can see the success information, right? So you can see when a new response is submitted, you know, follow the logic, right? And then you can click on each one and actually see who it went to, what the subject was, what the body was. It's a good way to make sure things are working as expected, right? This green check means that the logic was successful. Doesn't necessarily mean that what you wanted it to do happened, right? So it's good to monitor this because this may not have sent it to the correct place based on your logic. This just means it didn't run into any roadblocks, right? So this is good to keep a hold of. This is where you would do the co-owners that I mentioned, right? So if I hit share, super, super quick and easy to add a co-owner, and I highly, highly recommend it for pretty much all of your stuff. I'll just add my boss, and he'll get a notification that I shared this with him. And it's as simple as that. So to get started, let's go back into the edit screen. And again, at the top is your trigger. You can click and drag kind of like in the whiteboard view if you use Microsoft Whiteboard. You can kind of, click and drag this around if you have big flows. But the very top card will always be your trigger. And this trigger is when a new response is submitted in Microsoft Forms, right? So what I want to have happen is when this gets submitted, I want to send an email and a Teams notification to someone. Now, some of you who are expert flow users might realize that in the settings here, you can get email notification of each response, right? And you can just pick people in here. So if that's your only goal, this is a better solution, right? It's easier. Oops. You could just pop people in here, right? However, you might want to do more than that, right? You might want to say, hey, if they pick Teams, send it to Josh. If they pick OneDrive, send it to Raf. If they pick Forms, send it to Kelvin. If they pick Power Automate, send it to Johnny, right? This gives you the ability to do logic based on how they answered this form. So because of that, I picked the simplest option to start with, and then in the next example, we'll get a little bit more complicated. But the trigger is just when a new response is submitted. I want it to start when they fill out this form and hit submit, right? So because of that, that's the trigger I picked. And the only option I have in here is form ID. And if I click this drop down, my test account only has this one form, and that is indeed the form that I want to use. Then once it is submitted, I want to go to forms and I want to get the response details, right? And it's going to say, okay, what form? Same form. Response ID. Now this is a good example, right? I'll delete that out just to show you something here. The response ID is going to be whatever was created up here, right? In fact, a lot of those response IDs don't exist yet because nobody's seen this form yet, right? So in order to accurately give information in here, because it is a required field, you have to use a variable, which is super easy. You just click this lightning bolt, and it's going to show you all of the variables that are available above the current step you're on. And because there's only this one above, it's going to say, hey, because I triggered based on this form, I know the response ID because it's whatever was here. So you just have to click that, and that's it. It's going to grab all of the responses from that run, if you will. Then I just have a split here, right? It's going to do both of these things at the same time rather than linear. And it's going to say, send an email. And if I click on that, this is pretty straightforward, right? Who do you want to send it to? I'm sending it to myself, this test user. The subject is just, I just typed in what I want the subject to be. And then I typed in the body. And using that same methodology I showed you here, I added some variables, right? So it now knows based on this step everything that I responded with. So if I click on this just for example and click the lightning bolt, you see get response details now has all of these options, which equates to the answers of my form here, right? So I could send a generic email. I could just say, hey, a new request has been added, go look at it. But because I know what the options are, I can put it right in the email. So I don't have to go to this form at all. I can just say, hey, a new request has been added to the form. Here's the key details. Name is whatever the first name is, last name is dash seaweed, email is this, category is this, description is this, blah, 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 blah. Right? Super easy. Keep in mind these advanced parameters are important. By default, it will come from you, but if you are authorized to send on behalf of others, you can use that as well. If you're confused about that or have any questions about that, let me know. But that's the location you would use to not have it come from yourself. CC or BCC if you want, any attachments if you want, sensitivity if you want. Reply to by default, again, it'll go to you, but you can send it to others if you want. Particularly good if you're using the from send as, you could send it to somebody else. And then importance. Also, before I move on, this is another example of, remember when I said Lightning Bolt is good for variables? There's also functions. This is going to be the most code-esque that I'll talk about in this conversation, so don't worry about that. When you click on this, you'll get a view that looks like this, and I built this one. If this looks scary to you, don't panic. I used Copilot for this, right? So Copilot will be your friend. All I wanted to do was take the time that it puts in. It was in universal time. I wanted to convert it to Eastern time, where we all pretty much reside, right? So I asked Copilot, hey, in Power Automate, I have a form response that is in UTC. How can I convert it to Eastern time? And it gave me this, and I just replaced what it told me here with the dynamic content of submission time, right? And then I just hit update. So that is all I did. I didn't have to type any of that in. Copilot will be your best friend in Power Automate because this syntax is weird, right? So use Copilot. And then at the same time, I wanted to also send a Teams message just to show what that looks like, right? So if I click on this side, you'll note that the options are different. Post as Flowbot, post in a chat with Flowbot, recipient is myself, and I just pasted in that same stuff without the email header, basically, right? So I mentioned save often, so I'll do that. And then test often. So we'll go ahead and run this test, see if I broke anything. It'll ask if you want to do it manually or automatically. Obviously, the first time you'll have to do it manually, but every subsequent time you can do it automatically, which is super helpful because it'll just take that information that you already used and rerun it. Great for like, hey, I missed a variable. Hey, I wanted to change the format of this date. Hey, I want to change the spacing of my email, but I don't want to have to, complete that whole thing over again to trigger it. You can run it automatically after the first time based on previous runs that you have. But the first time you have to do it manually. So we'll go ahead and do that and say test. And now we'll go to the form. And again, best practice, if you are making the form, if you click on this, it'll try to edit it, right? So tip and trick is to hit preview and it'll actually let you complete the form. So I'll say Joshua, oh, whoops, hit the wrong button. Joshua Boral, here's my seaweed. That's not my seaweed. That's my seaweed. Let's say Power Automate. This is a test during my demo. Testing submit. And we'll go back, and it was waiting for me. It was like, hey, go do your thing. And we can see, hey, the flow ran successfully. Great. So we can click on each step if we want, make sure everything looks good if we want. Click on this, make sure it looks good. But the best way to check to make sure this worked correctly is to go look at the action, right? So if I go to Teams, you'll see I have a test message here that says a new request has been added to the form. Here's the key details. Blah, right? And that looks all correct. And if I look at my email, same thing. I see this is what it uses by default, right? I turned on the, hey, you're going to get this notification. This doesn't tell me much. And it tells me, hey, something happened. I need to go look at it. But now that I use Power Automate, I can see this, right? So rather than, hey, something happened, go look at it, straight in my email here, I can say, hey, there was a new request. Here's the name, like seaweed, the email, category, description, comments, and the time. Okay. That's kind of the simplest flow possible that I see a bunch. I know we're at time, so I'll speed run the next one, right? So lists. Lists is another example I get a lot. There's actually the possibility to kind of use forms within lists now. If you have questions about that, reach out to me. Or I think we talked about in the Tech Tuesday. I will skip that for now for the sake of time. However, I put a bunch of test data in here. And the reason people sometimes like to use lists over like a form is forms is great for collecting information and viewing kind of an aggregate of all of that data, right? I can see all the information at a glance. But lists is great because I can see every single row kind of like in an Excel like view. And then I can also have different views at the top, right? So I could say, group by view by the assignee, and then I could expand just my own stuff, right? And then I also have extra columns that I can fill out for like status and assignee that maybe the form individuals don't fill out, right? Or maybe I want a progress view so I could see, how many are unassigned, backlog, and progress are complete. So I get this question a lot. You can still have the form. Looks like this, very similar, right? But instead of saving it in forms, it'll save it here in this list. For this example, I put in a little bit of extra stuff here that we'll touch on. Let me expand all of this. So this time, the trigger is when an item is created and it just said what site, and I hit the drop down and I picked what site I wanted, my demo site. It's a team actually. And then what list? It's this list that I created in Teams, right? That just denotes this. And it's saying, okay, when an item is created, I'm going to kick this off. It's then going to go into a switch. So it's going to say, what do I want to switch on? And what I want to switch on is whatever they picked in this question category. So however they answered this question. And all this says is if they picked Teams, then I'm going to assign it to the Teams expert and send the Teams expert an email, right? If they picked OneDrive, I'm going to assign it to the OneDrive expert and send the OneDrive expert an email, etc., right? And if they didn't pick anything, right? If I add a different one and I forget to update this, it's going to go into default, which is anything else, and I'm going to assign it to the manager, right? So in that case, Raf's going to get the assigned email. All of this is the same from what we just talked about in the last one. And then finally, I'm going to send a receipt to the user, right? So I'm going to send it to the created by email address. New request receipt. Hello, your requests have been received. Here are the key details. Again, this is linear, right? So it's going to do this first, obviously. That's the trigger. It's going to go into the switch. It's going to say, okay, what did they pick for this question? If they picked Teams, it's going to do this. If they picked OneDrive, it's going to do this, etc. All right. And this is super handy because now I can say, okay, all of these requests that are coming in, I know that Raf handles all of the OneDrive questions or Josh handles all of the Power Automate questions, etc. Instead of as a manager saying, okay, we got a request in, I'm going to send this to Raf because he handles this, or I'm going to send this to Josh because he handles that. I can have this automation do all of that for me, right? Whenever something gets created based on this form that I'll publicize to people, it's going to go in here and automatically assign based on the contents of that form. Then my team can just live in this list, right? And they can go in every day and say group by, and they can say, okay, what do I have to work on today? Here's my stuff. Okay. So really quick, I know we're at time. This will be a good way to end, and then I'll open it up to any questions. We'll go ahead and test this one as well. And while I do this, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat. Put my name here. I'll pick Power Automate because that's what we're doing. And submit. So we'll let it run. Might take a second for this one because it's going to be doing some logic. But while I look through the chat, we'll wait for it to finish.
Mhm. Josh, there was one question that I wasn't sure about. It's a couple
Sure.
of questions up. It's regarding the limit on how many times a branch level can be split from Emily trailer.
Um, if you want the same condition, Met notification to occur in multiple places. There limit how many times you can duplicate. Um, I would reach out to me directly on that one. I have a hunch the answer is no. I think you could pretty much go as much as you want, but I would like to learn more about that specific request. So let's reach out offline on that one. Can this be connected to a Loop workbook? Good question. Loop is a relatively new application, so I'm not sure that they have all of the connectors for this yet, but there may be ways around that too. So we can chat offline about that one too. I think Raf, you answered all the other questions for me, and as I see here, this was successful. So if I go over to Teams, or no, I didn't do Teams on that one. Sorry, I did email for that one. You'll see. Um, here's my response, right? So this is the notification that it sent me, testing in the demo, hello, and it's sending it to me because I am, or no, sorry, this is the receipt. So who is the Power Automate person? Let's take a look. I don't even remember who I picked. I think it was my test account or my other account. Yeah, it was my one account. So let's see if I can open that up real quick while I wait for any other questions. Oh, not that one. Let's just open this and do this. Okay. Hmm. William, you have a good question. Condition and a switch. Condition is for two, and if or else. A switch is for three or more, right? So, because that drop down was a multi-step, right? There was four options in there. You would want a switch. If there's only an if this or that, right? A yes or a no, a one or a zero, you can use a condition. And here is the email that went through from my side, right? So it signed it to me, it told me what it was about, and it sent it to this correct person because this is the Power Automate expert in my example. Okay. That's it. I know we're over time. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I'm open to hang around for more questions if you have them. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Vanessa. Just one last thing. Please, again, can't highlight this enough. Reach out to me if you have any use case discussions, questions, you want to walk through a thought that you guys have with Power Automate. I'm more than happy to meet with you and your team to discuss possibilities. Please use me as a resource. And thanks for joining.
Thank you guys. Again, if you signed in a little late, I do have the recording of this session, so I'll be sure to send it to you in a follow-up email, as well as some useful guides about using Power Automate and Josh's contact information. So you could always reach out to him if you have questions about how to use Power Automate for your own purposes within your own department. So thank you guys so much for joining. We really appreciate it. We had a great crowd, lots of questions. And thank you again to Josh and Raphael for sharing more about our Microsoft apps. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.